Hi, in this video I'm going to show you how to do a pencil sketch of a lady's face. Please don't be intimidated by this picture, it's going to be super easy and we're going to go through it together. Let's get started. Firstly, I'm using a 2B pencil. Any pencil that's got a B in it is much easier to shade with and do the smooth shading. And the higher the number, the darker the pencil is. So you don't have to press as hard to get those nice dark tones. Right, the first thing that we're going to do is just draw the different components of the face before we start adding the shading and the details. Now, about a third of the way up the page, I'm going to do the lady's eye. And I'm just going to start with a little line. Her eyes are kind of closed in this picture. So we're just going to draw a curved line. And then we're going to draw the top of her eyelid, so it's going to come up and then slowly make its way down to the fold. This doesn't have to be exactly perfect. As you do your shading, you can see that, oh, that's not working, or this isn't quite the right shape. So it's easy to fix, especially if you've pressed quite lightly. Now, from her eye, we're going to take a line going down and take yourself about halfway down the page. I'm going to make a little mark, and this is going to help us with the start of the nose. Now, because we've got a cropped nose, we're just going to look at the lines that we need to draw. So if you look at this completed picture, it's actually just almost a C shape to the corner of the nostril, and then another flattened C shape for the end of her nose. Sometimes people look at something and say, oh, that's a nose, I can't draw a nose. But when you've cropped it off and you're just looking at it as these lines, it's much easier to look at that line and say, oh, I can draw a line like that and I can shade around it. Right, so we're going to first do our C shape. That's for her nostril. Then as it comes round, we want a more flattened C shape, and it's just kind of going to end there. So my cropped picture, I'm just ending it where I end it, and when I'm done with my picture, I'm going to cut it off so that that's the edge of the page. So you don't always have to draw your picture to suit the page. Sometimes you can make the page suit your picture. Right, now from the center of your eye, we can work out where the mouth is going to end. So if you just run your pencil down from the center of the eye and make a little mark, that's where the mouth's going to end. That doesn't mean that that's where there's going to be full lips. As you can see here, this is just a little bit of a line, and then after about ½ centimeter, we start drawing the lips. So you're not going to have full lips right to that point. There's like a little fold at the end of people's mouths, and her fold is going up. Some people, their fold goes down. And then the top lip's going to come up, and the highest point of the lip is underneath the nostril, the left nostril and the right nostril, and then there's a little dip underneath the dip of the nose. So that's going to help you keep track of drawing the top of the lip properly. Give it about a ½ centimeter gap, go up until you get to the nostril, and we're going to do a little bit of a dip that matches the dip of the nose. Okay, then the bottom of her lip, it's just a C shape or a curve, and again the widest part of this lip is going to be in the middle. Okay, we're not just going to draw a straight line across her lips. It's got a bit of a curve to it, so almost an M shape. Where the highest point of the lip is, it's going to go up a bit and come down a bit in the middle. You can see it's just a small amount, so it's not this big waving line, but it's not a straight line. Okay, so make sure it comes up a little bit underneath the highest point and then dips again. Now we're going to add the outline of her face. So just start from the top. We're going to make it fairly straight. When we get to this point between the nose and the mouth, you can start curving it in. And then you need to let it come out a little bit more for her chin. Right, for her eyebrow, it's going to start in line with her eye. So from the inside corner of her eye, just going to have a little line coming up, and you can mark off the starts of her eyebrows. You don't want the eye to end right on the edge of the face. There should be a gap there. Okay, and I'm just drawing lots of little lines. Most eyebrows have a little bit of an arch, and by the time you get to the end, you should really just be doing 1 or 2 little lines. So it can be fuller at the start, and it should get thinner as you go along, especially from this arch that goes down. It should definitely get thinner from there. Okay, almost in line with the eyebrows, we're going to add the ear. So this is going to be my mark for the top of the ear. And just above your nose is the mark for the bottom of the ear. So we have a space to work in now. Okay, for her ear, because we're viewing it from the front, you're not going to see a full ear, we're just going to see parts of the ear. Right, so for the ear, going to start with the top part of the ear. This is going to be shaded quite lightly, and then it's going to kind of curve down and make its way closer to the bottom of the ear. You should have a little lobe at the bottom here. So from this outermost point, you just slowly bring it down, and then at the lobe it might come out a little bit more. Okay, from where we started this point here, we're just going to let the line come in a little bit. Then it's going to come out, so it's like a little hill that we've drawn here. Make a circular shape, and that's going to come up. Now this line we're just going to leave like this because it's going to just end off in shading. From the outside corner of the ear, we can't see this fold even though it is there just because of the angle, but it starts to get wider again and then almost makes a C shape. Goes under this part that we've just drawn here. So we're drawing a line here to remind us to shade later, but this shouldn't be a dark line. You don't want to have a big line there. It's just a line to note for when we're shading. Right, and then on the inside of the ear, starting at the top, we're almost doing a V of light shading. It's going to come down to here. And it should meet up with this little line here. So I've just drawn this line really lightly because later on this is just going to be shading. Okay, so we've drawn the details on the ear now that we're going to need. She's also wearing an earring, so I'm just drawing a little line here. Then we're going to draw the loop. She's wearing a nice hoop earring. Okay, and then hair can sometimes be tricky, so I've chosen a picture of a lady who's wearing a headscarf. So we're just going to draw a line that's coming down fairly low over her head here. There's going to be a few folds in the scarf, so don't draw a straight line. If you look at this one, mine, it curves up slightly over her eye and then it comes down a little bit in the center of her face. And there's a little pattern or embellishment that ends almost at the top of her ear. Right, and then there'll be some fold lines in the headscarf, so I'm just going to draw a line lightly there. And then from the hoop of the ear, we'll have another line coming down here. And then just a short line. This will be her neck, so we'll just have a bit of dark shading here later on. Right, we've got the basics of our eye drawn now, and we can start adding the shading in. So we're going to start with the easiest shading first, which is the contours of her face. And then we'll build up to the trickier shading, the nose, the eyes, the mouth, the ear. Right, so to start with, we're going to make the outside of her face a little bit darker, particularly in this area here. And then you can also see that from the nose down to the edge of the mouth, there's also darker shading there. And we want it lighter up here because that's going to make her cheekbone stick out. The higher you do this light shading, then the higher her cheekbone will look. So that's something to remember if you're drawing someone's face and you think, oh, their face is looking a lot fatter than it should. It's because you've done this low shade, this shading too low, and you need to just lift it up a bit higher. Okay, so we're going to start with this dark shading on the side and dark shading from the nose. And it's almost going to make like a V shape of dark shading. And we're going to slowly let it get lighter and lighter. Now don't press too hard with this shading because we want your face to look nice and smooth. So we're going to rub the pencil to help it blend together. But if you've pressed really hard with the pencil, you're going to rub until you're blue in the face to make it look nice and smooth. So this is where using a B pencil that is darker helps, because you don't have to press so hard to get those nice darker shades. Okay, so I'm just starting with some dark shading around the edge here. Don't worry if you go too dark, it's really easy to lighten with an eraser, especially if you haven't pressed that hard. You can also see I'm holding my pencil really high up and I'm letting it touch the page at an angle. So this also helps me not press too hard. If you hold it down lower, you end up pushing with the tip of the pencil and then you press really hard and you leave those dark lines and ridges. So if you are someone that always ends up pushing a bit too hard, this is a nice trick to help you lighten and soften your shading. Okay, so I've started dark at the edges and I'm slowly just pressing lighter and lighter to get these lighter tones. Anyone that can write can shade, because it's just about controlling a pencil. Okay, now this is a little bit more tricky. From this nostril here, we're just going to draw a line down that kind of just misses the tip of her mouth, and this is going to be for her cheek. So the shading is going to be a little bit darker on this line, and then it will get lighter as we go up. Okay, so if you haven't caught up with me, you might want to pause the picture on this image so that you can get your shading in the correct space. Once you are happy with your shading, we're going to just take our thumb or our finger and rub from the dark shading into the light. We've done that from the edge of the face. Now I'm just going to turn my page and do some rubbing from this corner here. You might find that after you've done this rubbing, it's not quite dark enough on the edges, so you might want to go back and darken it again. So often with pencil sketching, it's just about layering it. Rather press lightly and do it twice, then press too hard and it doesn't turn out the way that you like. Okay, so I'm just darkening these little bits here. Right, so now we're going to start adding some shading around the eye and the top of the head. So firstly, her headscarf is going to make a little bit of a shadow on her face. So I'm making a bit of shadow. I'm not making it all the same thickness. So where I've gone up with the headscarf, I'm doing a little bit more shadow there. And then a thinner shadow. If you make it all exactly the same, it's not going to look as realistic. Where there are creases that go up, you need to just make it thicker. Okay, at the side of her head we'll have slightly darker shading, and this section over the center of her eye is going to be lighter. Okay, so we'll have a bit of darker shading here on the outside edge of her eye and on the inside edge. Okay, then there's almost like a C shape of dark shading around the inside of the eye. This is to show the bridge of the nose, and we can do some slightly darker shading down the left hand side of the nose. Okay, and around the bottom of the eye there will also be a bit of darker shading. This is the bottom eyelid here. Going to draw it in clearly with my pencil and then just do a bit of darker shading around it. Okay, let's just use our thumb to smooth out the shading. Okay, I'm going to darken the shading around the eye a little bit more now. So this top eyelid is going to have quite a lot of dark shading. And you can slowly shade out from that a little bit if you want to. Okay, and then her eyes, it's not fully closed. So about 2/3 of the way down the eye, we're going to draw her top eyelid. Looks funny now, but don't worry, it's going to work out all right. Okay, so we're also going to do some dark shading in there. These are the two folds, and it can get lighter as it gets away from these two folds. Then smooth it over with your finger. Now what we're going to do later is bring our razor and lighten up some of these spots. So don't worry if it is looking too dark. We will be lightening it up later. Okay, this is also going to be dark here, the bottom of her eye. Okay, we're going to move on to the tip of her nose now. So on this bottom part of her nose, there's going to be some darker shading. And in the center of her nose here, it will be larger because you've got a point at the end of your nose. I'm just going to erase the side of mine here a little bit. Okay, and then there'll just be a little bit of lighter shading there. Okay, again, you can just use your thumb to soften and smooth it out. Underneath her nose, it's going to be quite dark shading. There's the shadow of her nose on her mouth. You need to be very careful when shading the upper lip of a lady because you don't want her to look like she has a moustache. Okay, but she does have to have a bit of darker shading on here. I found press really lightly and go sideways. If you draw lines going down, it immediately makes people think of all these hairs like a little moustache. Whereas if you are doing horizontal shading, it's not exactly the first thing someone will think of when they see it. Okay, we're going to make it a little darker on this spot here. Okay, and then again, just take your finger, rub from dark to light. Okay, and then for her chin, the center of the chin is going to have some darker shading. And underneath her lips will be darker shading. You can see I didn't color right to the end of the chin, and that's because we do want a little bit of light shading there. Don't worry if you have gone right to the edge, because you can just use your eraser to smooth that out. Okay, what I'm going to do now is take my eraser, which is actually a drawing tool as well, and lighten up some spots. So I want to lighten up her cheeks a little bit. So I'm just, again, using the side of the eraser. And I've almost done a V from the nose to the eye and down. Okay, on her eyelid here in the center of the eye, that needs to be lightened. And on her forehead in the same place. You can rub with your finger just to make it a bit more even. So if it's this shockingly white with dark shading around it, rub it with your finger just to make it a more gradual and softer shading. The tip of her nose, we also want to lighten a bit, down the bridge of her nose. Okay. If you've rubbed too much of your shading out, just go and make it a bit darker again. You need this shading on the edge of the nose to make her nose look like it's got a bridge. Right, before I lighten some of the areas around her lips, I'm just going to shade her lips. So they're going to be quite a bit darker in the middle to show the shadow, and her bottom lip's easier, so I'm going to start with that. We're just going to do some dark shading at the bottom of the lip and let it get lighter as it gets to the middle. Again, we can just use our finger to smooth that shading out. Right, for the top of the lip, again, we're just going to follow the line that we've done. Slowly let the shading get lighter. The top of her lip here, we're going to have a little bit of darker shading. And then slightly less darker shading for this part that goes down. Right, before we add the details of the lip, we've done the shading now, so we can lighten it. just above her lip. If you can use the corner edge of your eraser and just do that little fold above the lip. So we want a nice thin line, and we also want to make sure that we lighten the bottom lip. So the more light you add to the lip, the fuller the lips look. So if it's a thin lip, you're going to have a lot of dark shading, but for a fuller lip, you want to have a nice light shading in the middle. Just going to add a few little creases or lines to the lips. I've done a few from the top and a few from the bottom. You want them to be slightly different lengths and distances, so they shouldn't be too regular. For the top lip, just draw them going up, but on the bottom lip you can draw from the top and the bottom. And then I'm just going again over those dark spots just to tie it together. For the eye, we're going to add a few eyelashes, and to do that, again, if you can use a sharp edge of your eraser, just draw or flick your pencil down a few times to make these lines. Now these are obviously a lot thicker than what we would like, but if we just add some eyelashes in between, drawn, the little bits of light will show up and it will make people think of eyelashes. Right, if you think your eye is looking too small, add a bit of dark shading around the edges. You can also slightly lengthen it on each side. So I'm not happy with the width of my eye. So I'm coming here and I'm just working on this shading a bit more. So you can just add a little bit of length onto each end and you'll be surprised at what a difference that can make. Just going to work on this shading underneath the eye. So from the fold, make it lighter and lighter. Right, I'm going to move on to the ear now. So this front part of the ear is going to be quite light. We're just going to make it slightly darker on each end and lighter as it gets to the middle. And from the edge of her face here, there'll be a little bit of shadow. So we're going to make it darker and let that lighten. Okay, then you can just give it a little rub. Be some dark shading there. And then again, as it comes down, just make it slightly darker on each edge. Right, so I've worked my way down to the earlobe now. Where it touches the face, we'll have a bit of darker shading. And this little curved C that we drew earlier is also going to be a marker for some dark shading. So just doing a bit of darker shading on that line, and then letting it get lighter and lighter. Okay, inside here, this C is going to also be very dark. This is leaning to the inner ear, or the inner part of the ear. And as it comes up, it can get lighter and lighter. Just colour in this whole section, getting lighter as you get to the top. So start really dark. I'm going to do, again, some dark shading in this far corner here. And then this little almost triangular or V shape is going to slowly get lighter. So from here we just get lighter and lighter, and from there you can also get lighter. Right, then you're just going to take your eraser, and in this little corner here, I'm always making a sea of light shading. I'm also going to lighten a few other areas of the ear, so this top section here that we started with, and to make sure that there's some nice light there. So just a few spots of light can give the ear a bit more definition. Okay, the earring, on the right hand side we're going to make it a little bit darker, and as we get to the bottom, all of it should be quite dark. As it twists around, you can make it darker, and then it can start to get lighter on the curve. And then at the top, this top part will be in shadow, so we can just slowly make it lighter. If you want to smooth it out with your finger, you can. And then, because it's going to probably be a metal or gold, we want to have a nice shine on it. So I'm using my eraser to just get that nice shine. Right, we're going to go onto the neck now. So the neck is in quite a lot of shadow. It needs to be much darker than the face. Can let it get a little bit lighter. Right, and here where the headscarf comes over her face, you can also make it a little darker and then lighten it slowly. Right, I'm probably going to cut my picture off around about there, so you don't need to worry about shading too much further down. Take your finger, again rub from dark to light. If you're going to have more of her neck exposed, you need to start adding details to the neck, which we are just going to leave out because we're going to crop it. So if there's just a small section of the neck, it's fine to just leave the shading quite basic. You can take your eraser and lighten the chin up a little bit so that there's a bit more definition or difference. It makes the chin come forward and the neck go back, so she just looks more three-dimensional. Okay, this lady, she had a little mole or a freckle on her chin, so I'm just going to add it in. Just a bit of dark shading there. Right, let's move on to the headscarf now. So she's got a little bit of dark hair sticking out between the ear and the head over here. It's almost like a triangle. And I'm just doing scribbling just to make you think of the texture of hair. And then there's some beading or embellishments on the edge of her scarf. So to show this, I'm just going to do a bit of darker shading. Where there's a dip coming down, just make it slightly darker so that it makes a shadow for the fold in the fabric. So you might want to go and do those dips first, like I've just done here. And then you can go with your other shading over that. Okay, I'm going to give that a rub. So that's the base of my shading, and now I can add some details to that. So I'm just going to add a few scribbles, and I'm not making the scribbles a solid line, so I'm making them broken lines. And this could be like thread work, beading. This shading is just to give people the idea of the texture. So it's not there to show light or dark, it's just there to show texture. Another thing that I'm going to do is take my eraser and just do a few dots of light shading. Also, don't do the straight line of light shading, just make it at irregular spots. And when someone looks at it, they'll get the impression of a lot of intricate beadwork, but without us having to sit and draw lots of intricate beadwork. Okay, there's going to be a fold in the fabric over here. So we'll do a bit of darker shading in this area. At the corner of the ear, there'll also be a bit of dark shading. Again, you can see I've got my pencil on its side so that this is going to all blend smoothly later. You don't want to press too hard. Right, earlier we drew a really thin line down here that was going to show the fold in the fabric. So from this line, we're going to do dark shading and then slowly make it lighter and lighter. And that's going to give the impression of a fold in the fabric. The more dark shading you do, the bigger the fold looks. So going to do a bit more dark shading at the bottom, and then as it gets to the top, I'm making it thinner and thinner, so then it looks like this small fold that's becoming a bigger fold. Right, and we're going to have another fold here by the earring. So again, we're going to start quite dark, get lighter and lighter. And this section right against the face, I want you to make it quite dark. It's going to give the edge of the face definition, and also a piece of material that's gone behind your ear and the side of your face is going to be in shadow, so it will be darker. Right, and on the top here we'll just do a bit of lighter shading to help it blend out. If you were using an HB or a 2H, you would be finding it very difficult to do this shading now, well, to blend it nicely. Okay, we're also going to just make the fabric a little bit darker around the edge of the ear. This is to give the ear definition, but also because the ear will cast a bit of a shadow on her fabric. And the shadow can go into the earring too. Right, now that we've added all of our shading, we can take our finger, really rub out this. Okay, to help keep the definition here, I'm rubbing from this dark line out. If I just rubbed over the whole thing, you would lose this line. So you need to make sure that you just stay on the outside edge of the line. So we keep it nice and clean there and just make a shadow on the left-hand side of it. You can see I'm also turning my page so that I can rub easily with my finger. Okay, then we can do our next fold. Right, once you've done that, you might find that you need to add a little bit more definition in some areas, so really darken it up. You don't want your picture to all be the same tone. So darker tones will definitely make your picture more interesting. So get into those spots that are supposed to be darker and add a bit more dark shading. Right, and then finally you take your eraser and any little spots you'd like to lighten again. Right, once you are happy with your picture, you can just crop off the bits that you don't need, and there you have your portrait. I hope you had lots of fun. Please hit the like button if you did, and subscribe to my channel if you'd like to learn more about drawing and art.